Hello and welcome to episode 301 of Stand Up with Pete Dominic Daily. Joining me today, poverty expert Dr. Mark Rank joins me, and the founder and CEO of All In Together, my friend Lauren Leader, will help me ring in International Women's History Month now that we're into March. I am Pete Dominic. Time to stand up with me right now. Hello and welcome to the second day of March. If you're listening along with me to the daily podcast, thank you very much for joining me. I know I said yesterday that March welcomes St. Patrick's Day and Mother's Day, and I realized immediately what had gone wrong. I was looking at International Women's History Month calendar and thinking that my mom, her birthday is March 12th, and that is coming up, and I think that's what I was confused by. I don't know. I don't have any other excuse. But my mom, who is now on Twitter, actually caught that on the podcast and vindicated me by saying, you must have been thinking of my birthday. And by the way, everybody has to follow my mom on Twitter. I don't know if she'll say much. She doesn't even have a profile photo. But my mom on Twitter would be hilarious if you guys said hello and make her feel good. At MaryDominic19. That's my mom. You can follow her and say hello there. She said, "Hey world," her first tweet, "I just supported Pete Dominic on Patreon and you can too. Internet high five, ? Mom, you're the best. Thank you for listening as well. And Val, thank you for listening. My wife listens, and so many new subscribers, paid subscribers to the show. I'll read the names in a bit, but I've got to get to the news. This first segment of the show every day here on Stand Up Daily deals mostly with the last 24 hours of news, headlines, and audio sound bites. That's why I call it the last 24. Shall we? First, just wanted to mention the good news that the Johnson & Johnson's one-shot coronavirus vaccine for emergency use is on its way. It'll be limited to 3.9 million doses, but expected to ship this week. About 800,000 going directly to pharmacies. An estimated 20 million doses are expected by the end of March and 100 million doses by the end of June. My wife's got an appointment because she sees a lot of people. Comedian Christian Finnegan just tweeted that he has an appointment. Christian tweeted, "I have my first shot on Saturday. Thanks, obesity." So great news about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine being rolled out. That'll put 3 vaccines in the American system. And the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, like the other vaccines, is apparently 100% preventative against death. I like that idea. And it only needs 1 dose, and you could just use a regular refrigerator. So a lot of good news is on the way. More and more Americans are getting vaccinated every day and well ahead of schedule. The goal of 100 million vaccines in the first 100 days of the Biden administration. I think that's pretty fair to say, according to pretty much all authorities on it. And how about this? President Biden, according to labor historians, has given the strongest pro-union statement of any U.S. president since FDR, when he came out in solidarity with Amazon warehouse workers currently organizing to form a union in Bessemer, Alabama warehouse. Here he is with that video.
I've long said America wasn't built by Wall Street. It was built by the middle class, and unions built the middle class. Unions put power in the hands of workers. They level the playing field. They give you a stronger voice for your health, your safety, higher wages, protections from racial discrimination and sexual harassment. Unions lift up workers, both union and non-union, and especially black and brown workers. So let me be really clear. It's not up to me to decide whether anyone should join a union. But let me be even more clear. It's not up to an employer to decide that either. The choice to join a union is up to the workers, full stop. Full stop. Today and over the next few days and weeks, workers in Alabama and all across America are voting on whether to organize a union in their workplace. The law guarantees that choice. And it's your right, not that of an employer. It's your right. No employer can take that right away. So make your voice heard.
I myself have been a strong supporter and a member of unions, the SAG-AFTRA union. My mom was a longtime public school teacher who is in a union in upstate New York for teachers in central New York. And I've been a big supporter of teachers' unions for years now. And so I love to hear this. The union organized labor is never perfect and often has issues with corruption. But I think that it is an absolute necessity for the labor movement, for a strong middle class in this country and any other. So full-throated support from Joe Biden, according to labor historians. That is the biggest, most important statement for the labor movement since FDR. Pretty impressive. Now to a Democrat who's not having such a good time, and that is my governor, Andrew Cuomo, who may not last the week as the governor of New York. Will he or won't he resign? I talked with Lauren Leader about that in our conversation today. But first, I just got to play this for you because the audacity of Lindsey Graham in this clip talking about what needs to be done in Andrew Cuomo's case. Here is old Lynn's Lady G on Fox News.
Well, here's what I would tell my Democratic colleagues to do. Follow the Republican model. We had a Republican nominee for the Supreme Court be accused of something the day before we voted, the moment before we voted. We could have gone ahead saying this was too late. You sat on it. You didn't tell us. This is not fair. We stopped the entire damn process. We had days and weeks of hearings. We had another FBI investigation. We took it seriously. And what should you do as Democrats regarding Cuomo? Do exactly what Republicans did.
Right. Do exactly what Republicans did. Smart stuff. Lindsey Graham. Great. Thank you. If that's not infuriating, if you're not outraged, then maybe I need to play that one for you again. I know. Tough to take. You know who we need to listen to is a great Republican senator from Alabama. It's Tommy Tuberville, who his last job, he was a football coach. And now somehow he is a U.S. senator telling us that the problems that we have with our morality is that we just don't have enough religion in our schools. That's the issue. And listen to him because he's an educator or really a football coach. What an epic asshole this guy is.
We've got to start teaching our young people moral values again.
Oh, good Lord.
That starts with putting God and prayer back in our schools.
No, it doesn't.
Our kids need structure.
No, they don't.
And they need to learn right from wrong.
You wouldn't be the guy to tell them.
Everything that has happened in education over the past few decades, from a front row seat on my sideline as a coach.
You're a football coach.
Embarrassing.
You're a football coach. You should be embarrassed.
Who chooses to spend their career in education, I now have the opportunity to say something as a United States Senator.
And nobody cares. At least I don't. But I just had to play that because there's always going to be some religious a-hole that's going to tell us that we just need more God in our schools and in our life. Ugh, thank you. You could be very moral without God and religion in your life. Just look up the UN Declaration of Human Rights. It talks about rape, unlike the Ten Commandments. All right, sorry about that rant, but Tommy Tuberville really lit my fire. Okay, let's get back to the troubles of the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo. His brother, Chris Cuomo, on CNN opened his show this way because he's not allowed to talk about Andrew Cuomo unless things are going really good for him. But if things are bad, he can't say anything, of course.
I am Chris Cuomo, and welcome to Primetime. Before we start tonight, let me say something that I'm sure is very obvious to you who watch my show. And thank you for that. You're straight with me, I'll be straight with you. Obviously, I'm aware of what's going on with my brother. And obviously, I cannot cover it because he is my brother. Now, of course, CNN has to cover it. They have covered it extensively, and they will continue to do so. I have always cared very deeply about these issues, and profoundly so. I just wanted to tell you that. There's a lot of news going on that matters also, so let's get after that.
Okay, so I don't know what to tell you. It's a real conflict of interest there for the 9 o'clock slot on CNN to not be able to cover that. I'd like to see what they do there. Here is Trevor Noah and The Daily Show taking this on.
Guys, of course he was being playful. I mean, imagine your much older, politically powerful boss turns to you and says, "When was the last time you were really hugged?" That's super playful. Can't you feel your skin crawling with delight? Here's the thing. Even if Cuomo did think that he was just being playful, it's still not okay, all right? This is what bosses never seem to understand. If you're a boss, you should never be flirtatious with your employees because as a boss, you're basically a dragon, all right? Nobody's ever trying to hug a dragon. They're just trying to get out of the cave in one piece.
Seriously, Caitlin, maybe sometime we should go out for a coffee.
So right now, things are looking pretty bad for Governor Cuomo. He's facing investigations and even calls to resign. And you know that it's not good when you're the person in trouble and you're like, guys, please, remember all those old people in nursing homes that got killed? Let's talk about that again. Come on, huh? And I'll tell you, man, all those people who praised Cuomo so highly last year, whew, those people really don't look so smart now. Delete the tapes, delete them all. I mean, it must be so embarrassing. Can you imagine if you're one of those people? Just burn them. I don't give a shit. Burn them. Yeah, and then you just cut this part out.
Well, there you go. Trevor Noah on The Daily Show sounds like he was singing Andrew Cuomo's praises. I don't think I ever really was. I don't think I ever really bought it. He's my governor, and I've watched him and his family and behave, and he strikes me as a bully, and I don't like bullies. And I just didn't buy all of that praise when he was, I don't know, maybe you can go back and find me saying something really nice, but I don't know. I don't think I did. Doesn't matter. Moving on. I think it's pretty reprehensible what is happening with this governor. I think it's pretty obvious what's going to have to happen, but we'll see if he gets out of it and somehow skates away. He's got a lot of support still, although his big money funders are pressing a pause button. So he's definitely in real danger. And it's an important story, and regardless if it's a liberal or a conservative, a Democrat or a Republican, that kind of behavior, it's unacceptable. And if you want to be consistent, be against it, then it doesn't matter if it's politically bad for you and your party. And if only Republicans would think that way. All right, moving on. The big news, the last 24 coming out of Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat of Massachusetts, who introduced legislation yesterday, Monday, that would tax the net worth of the wealthiest people in America, a proposal aimed at persuading President Biden and other Democrats to fund sweeping new federal spending programs by taxing the richest Americans. Here she is at the press conference announcing the wealth tax.
The people who could afford to pay a fair share, understand their wealth will continue to grow. You know, during the pandemic, they have increased, the billionaires have increased, the billionaires have increased their wealth by $1.3 trillion. But they've been growing their wealth for years now at 6%, 8%, 10%, 12%. They have their own money managers, their own people who manage these great fortunes. A 2-cent wealth tax means they just don't grow it quite as fast. But that 2 cents is an enormous difference for the rest of America. It is an opportunity for every child in America to have universal pre-K, an opportunity for every child to have child care paid for, and every parent, and to raise the wages of every child care worker. We can make a huge difference with this wealth tax.
I say it's a slam dunk. It would apply a 2% tax to individual net worth over $50 million and an additional 1% surcharge above $1 billion. And so are you for it? Are you against it? What is the drawback? What is the problem? Why would you not be for this? It would do so much good and raise so much money to pay for important programs that create opportunity for other people to gain some wealth in the United States of America. She said it would raise $2.75 trillion over a decade, which she suggests would pay for education and child care. And I talked with Dr. Mark Rank about that later on today's show as well.
On this vote, the yeas are 64, the nays are 33. The nomination is confirmed.
That was a sound from the Senate floor in the last 24 hours, where the Senate confirmed Miguel Cardona as President Joe Biden's education secretary. He'll oversee an education department that employs thousands, has an annual budget of more than $60 billion, also oversee the agency's $1.5 trillion student loan portfolio. Tough time to take control of the Department of Education. He's the former commissioner of education in Connecticut. He's also, guess what, a former teacher. How about that? And not a billionaire that wants to turn our public schools into worship zones. Christ companies. I don't know what the hell Betsy DeVos ever named them, but that's what she wanted to do. And so this is definitely a step in the right direction. He's vowed to undo many of the policies Davos put in place, including her strict rules for investigations of sexual misconduct at schools and colleges, plus her looser guidelines benefiting for-profit colleges. He's also emphasized a focus on civil rights and LGBTQ students, stressed legal rights of transgender children when pressed during the confirmation hearing. And so there you go. Miguel Cardona confirmed as Joe Biden's education secretary in the last 24. Here's Mary Trump. I think she was on The Hill, thehill.com. She says that Donald Trump made a lot of money in the last couple months. I don't know if I agree with her. I don't know what she means, but here.
I think he's made more money in the last several months since promoting the big lie than he maybe has ever. And he's not going to turn away from that opportunity. The other thing that I think we've seen with Donald for decades is that the more room you give him to transgress, the more room he'll take. And the Republican Party had several opportunities to take an off-ramp as soon as President Biden was elected, and they've refused to do it. And Donald is going to make the most of that. I think he believes that if he remains the leader of the Republican Party, that will continue in some way to grant him immunity. I don't think that's going to be the case, but he'll do whatever he can to change the subject or to protect himself.
I wonder if Mary Trump is ever getting together with any of the other Trumps these days. I bet not. Anyway, there's her analysis on what she thinks her uncle's up to, and that's all I've got for you about Donald Trump. I think we're going to have to continue to pay attention and talk to him as much as we don't want to, because he is still the leader of the Republican Party. He doesn't want to create a third party, he said at CPAC. And until Republicans turn away from him, this loser, then he's still going to be a very influential player in the Republican Party, the cult party, the Trump party, the conspiracy party, the anti-democratic party, frankly, the party of authoritarians. That is what they have become. And that is what I dug up for you from the last 24 hours in sound bites. What did I miss? You can always send me links to what you want me to play and share with others. All right, now let's get to the news dump. This is rapid fire headlines, no politics, no COVID, undercovered stories, important and interesting, as many as I can get to in just a couple of minutes.
Running nonstop. Like your Forrest Gump? Well, sit down, relax, here comes today's news dump.
Yeah, another great news dump jingle from Damn It Donald. Keep 'em coming, boys. Keep 'em coming. No one ever wants to hear the words school shooting, but that's what we had ourselves in the state of Arkansas, where a 15-year-old boy shot another 15-year-old boy, a fellow student of his, and the only one hurt, was hospitalized in very serious condition on Monday afternoon. And the suspect, also a 15-year-old boy, like I said, was found hiding behind a house near the school. He's been taken to the Juvenile Justice Center and is awaiting charges. That is in Arkansas. And I'm glad we haven't seen that much of that, because people have been going to school, but it still sucks horrifically that we have so many school shootings in this country. But now here's a good story. 5 people, including an infant, were trapped inside a truck in a flooded creek in Tennessee, and they were all rescued from a pickup truck that had slid off a water-covered bridge into a swollen creek, according to ABC News in Tennessee on Sunday afternoon. This is amid severe flooding across the southern U.S. state. So that's good news. See, water rescue teams from multiple agencies worked together. Oh, you got to see the video of this. It's crazy. But congratulations to the DeKalb County Fire Department. And that's an awesome story. See, they're not all bad here on the news dump. And this was a huge story yesterday. A Paris court found French former President Nicolas Sarkozy guilty of corruption and influence peddling on Monday, sentenced him to a year in prison. He can ask to serve that time at home, and also plans to appeal. But the 66-year-old president, six-year-old who was president from 2007 to 2012, was convicted of trying to bribe a magistrate in exchange for information about a legal case in which he was implicated. Imagine that. A president goes to jail. Yay! Let's do it here now. Let's be as bold and as brave as the French in holding our corrupt public officials accountable. Here's some car news out of Detroit. The U.S. government is investigating complaints of engine compartment fires in nearly 1.9 million Toyota RAV4 small SUVs. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration began investigating after getting 11 fire complaints involving the 2013 through 2018 Toyota RAV4. So if you got one of those, the top-selling vehicle in the U.S. that's not a pickup truck, then you might want to bring it to the dealership. Also, if you own a RAV4, I think you're kind of a douche. I love being judgmental about the automobile that somebody drives that somehow represents their character or personality. It's so unfair. And I like this story coming out of Europe, where apparently they're now going to have the, quote, right to repair for some electrical goods. Companies that sell refrigerators, washers, hairdryers, or TVs in the European Union will need to ensure those appliances can be repaired for up to 10 years. The right to repair, is sometimes called, comes into force across the 27-nation bloc on Monday as part of a broader effort to cut the environmental footprint of manufactured goods by making them more durable and energy efficient. And that is a great idea and a story I love. Can we do that here too, please? And how about this next story? Twitter is expanding its system of warning labels for misinformation and conspiracy theories to apply to posts about the coronavirus vaccines. A blog post Monday set out the new rules, and I think that's great. Enforcement will begin with employees slapping labels on tweets not grounded in reliable research or reporting. I think this is a long time coming, and this is something that they should have invested in a long time ago, but better late than never. And that is the end of today's news dump, everybody. And now, as promised, I want to give shout-outs to all of the new subscribers. I cannot do this daily show without your support. I'm a one-man band. I've only got my fake assistant, Keith, who I sometimes yell at, but I'm now over 300 shows, and it is going so well every day. A couple of smart guests, a whole news segment. It's Stand Up with Pete Dominic daily, and I can't do it without your support. So here are the shout-outs to the new subscribers who have joined in the last, week to 10 days. And I might have an overlap since the last time. Maybe you're getting a shout out for the second time because I forgot to flag where I ended. But Alex Rosano, thank you for joining with a $10 subscription. Corey Nathan with a $10 subscription. I was on Corey's podcast. David Stern with a $5 subscription. Corey Monroe with a $7 subscription. I didn't know that was a choice, Corey, but I'm psyched to have it. Matthew Hansen with a $5 subscription. Megan May with a $10 subscription. Hi, Dr. Megan May. You've got to come back on the show. It's been too long. Craig Oxendine with a $25 subscription. Craig, that is awesome. Thank you very much. Dave Green, $5. Adam Ishikawa, $5. Hi, Adam. Dave Vonnie May with $5. Dave Rick with a $10 subscription. Troy Landon is a $10 subscriber. Mike Gustafson, $5. Eric Nitzel, $5. Sam Lippert, $5. My cousin, Darcy. Hi, Darcy Merceru, who is a brilliant woman, a $10 subscriber. Thanks, Darcy. Love you. Aaron Pinto, $10 subscriber. Rhonda Drescher just signed up for a $5 subscription. So did Ryan Maizano. Hi, Ryan and Rhonda. And Gianfranco Origliato signed up for a $10 subscription. Wow, what an awesome Italian dude. Gianfranco Origliato, $10. Thank you, sir. Grazie tanto, Eric Ollie. Hey, Eric, a $10 subscription from Eric, and from John Vasquez as well, $10 from John. Thank you very much, John. Maxine Nadel and Russ Offenbach signed up for a $10 subscription. Daniel Swank, a $5 subscription. Meet Larry, a $5 subscription. Meet Michael Deshawn, a $5 subscription. Meet Kate Kubit. Why is it saying that? I thought you guys were writing that. Kate Kubit with a $10 subscription, as well as, did I say Ryan Walter? I think I already said that. Oh my God. So many new subscribers. So great to have you in our community. I hope that you'll join our hangout and introduce yourselves to us in person virtually on Thursdays at 8. Someday we're all going to get together at Mitch's house in Florida. So many amazing, generous, thoughtful, hilarious, Kind People Networking, and also comedian JL Covan. You get access to the Discord platform now where you can chat anytime. You're never alone if you're part of the stand-up community. Thank you for supporting independent media and me. I'm so psyched to have you. Coming up, anti-poverty expert, professor, and author of Poorly Understood What America Gets Wrong About Poverty, Dr. Mark Rank will join me. But first, I'm also very psyched to have my first guest joining me. She and I go way back. I'm not sure exactly. I guess we met on some cable news panel at some point, but she is a really smart, brilliant woman who is a leader, who is fearless, who I admire a great deal, who I wanted to have on here at the beginning of National Women's History or International Women's History Month. She's the co-founder and CEO of All In Together, which is a nonpartisan organization training American women on civic leadership. She also works with and advises corporations on diversity, public policy, corporate social responsibility. She is a writer. Her research and writing has appeared in almost every major news outlet. You've seen her on all the big top cable news networks. She speaks at conferences like the Aspen Ideas Festival, where, as you'll note, I'll note at the top here, we last, I think, saw each other. And she was a 2018 presidential leadership scholar. She is on Twitter at Lauren Leader AIT, at Lauren Leader AIT. So happy to have Lauren Leader joining me on the podcast for the first time. Here we go. Lauren Leader, thank you for doing stand-up. I'm very excited to see you.
I'm happy to see you too, Pete.
You just reminded me before I hit record, the last time we saw each other was at the Aspen Ideas Festival, which was in a completely different age and time. Trump was still president.
There were
no pandemic.
Yeah, crowds getting together to do stuff in person. Craziness.
What do you miss most? What are you most looking forward to doing? Is there anything that you are really excited about?
You know, like the extrovert that I am, I get a lot of energy off of being with people and, you know, lunches and, you know, when you sit down and brainstorm and everybody walks away feeling fired up and meeting new people in person, all of those things are things that keep me going. And I definitely miss them. I also miss going to DC and showing up someplace for lunch and then looking around the room to see who you know that's in the room. You know, that's always like a fun game. I never really game.
I didn't do that as much in kind of political circles as I have in like entertainment circles, but I definitely want to
Well, you're cooler than me. You're cooler
I think you're cooler than me. I think political stuff is cooler than Hollywood stuff for sure. It's interesting.
Maybe, but most people don't geek out on, you know, lunch at the Hay Adams and hey, isn't that the deputy director of the Office of Management and Budget sitting across the room? Most people don't. Most people don't care about that.
I absolutely,
I'm one of those people.
I absolutely do. Like when we're at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, everybody's looking at George Clooney, and I'm looking at oh my gosh, I want to ask Madeleine Albright a couple questions.
Well, that is appropriate. So I'd much rather ask Madeleine Albright a question than George Clooney. But anyway,
well, I love George Clooney. Don't get me wrong.
Who doesn't love George Clooney?
Okay. It is, what is it, International Women's Month. March is supposed to be dedicated to all things women's history. Yep. But it's not, it's international, I feel like.
Correct.
It's not.
Well, and then March 8th is International Women's Day, which is definitely on a global scale, not just in the U.S.
So I'm excited to hear about, obviously, the things that you have coming up. But I want to look back with you to try to understand, because it is History Month. And I want to look kind of at the last 4 years and the idea that we went to bed on election eve of 2016, pretty sure we would wake up with the first female president. Very sure. My daughters, I'd promised them that, as a matter of fact. 4 years of the worst man, abusive man, misogynist, a sexist, horrible man who'd been accused by so many things. Dealing with that created, in many ways, the movement that we saw, I think, and also the Me Too movement. We can call it all kinds of things. I don't know how you refer to it, but what do you think happened for women and equity during the last 4 years?
Well, I might have answered this a little differently before January 6th, actually. But look, I do think there's no question. So I didn't go to bed that night because I was in the Javits Center waiting for Hillary to show up. So I was up all night. It was horrible. Thank you for making me relive it. Appreciate that,
I'm
Pete.
sorry, but it is history.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, I think there's no question that we have gone through like a huge transformation politically in this country over the last few years. And obviously the wake up call for many American women, certainly on the left, the willingness of lots more women to step forward to run for office. And you saw that reflected for sure in the 2018 midterms, where you had this historic number of women. And then, you know, it was also, I think we can't talk about the last 4 years without also talking about, you know, some of the extremism that was also awakened among conservative women. And, you know, obviously there was incredible progress in terms of just overall numbers, representation of women in both state houses and in the federal level in the 2018 cycle. And then you also had in 2020, a historic number of Republican women who ran and won, the largest number in many years. And among those were people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert, who represent Trumpism and a staunch commitment to all the things that he stands for. And so, and you see this in state houses around the country. And so I think there's no question that there has been a massive political awakening but it's happened on both sides of the aisle. And I think it's happened in ways that are more polarizing than we even realized. And that's why I mentioned January 6th, because I think you can't talk about anything in American politics anymore without talking about what happened on January 6th. And, you know, one thing that also just in my own life, I ran for office in 2019. I was elected to local office in my town in Westchester County, which is the last Republican majority town in Westchester. I'm the only woman on my town board. And I have to tell you, like, all of those same divisions that you see at the national level are absolutely reflected in my town. You know, I get routinely trolled by very aggressive, angry Trump supporters.
In your own town?
In my own town.
Oh,
absolutely.
I'm so sorry to hear that. Oh, boy,
no,
that's
I mean, listen, this is
rough.
what happens in politics today. If you are a woman who speaks out, and certainly for women on the left, you know, it's very complicated. I mean, I've had security called to my house, and, you know, people are very angry. Can
I ask you to relive that a little bit too? I'm really sorry, but like, what kind of, these are people who, is it ever people that you go by their own names on Facebook or whatever, or is it anonymous? Yeah. And how often is it gender based stuff, or is it just general?
So it's, you know, look, nobody is explicitly saying because you are a woman X, but I'm also targeted more than anybody else in public office in my town. And I get targeted by these very angry mobs of Facebook people who hate me. And yes, I do know who they are. There are some fake accounts that we know about. But most of them are, in fact, people we know and know who they are. And they show up at our town board meetings and, you know, continue to yell at me, which is their right as engaged citizens. But I think what you're seeing is that the hyper politicization, the hyper polarization, you know, no matter what I say or do, there are people who are, you know, who hate me, who see me as an enemy, and who will fight anything that I say or do. And I think it's been really illuminating for me to look at national politics now as someone who's worked in national politics for all these years, now through the lens of what's happening at the ultra local level, which is just the level of anger. And that anger, I think, particularly after this election, you know, it's not quieted down. I mean, the extremism and the anger and the mob mentality online is alive and well. And I think you just can't talk about politics today, and especially for women, without it talking about that.
Well, how is it that, you know, I'm not sure exactly what your office is or what your responsibilities are, but how much of the criticism, the anger, the hatred, the threats have to do with policies, the agenda, or at the local level? What are they kind of saying to you? Why are they doing this?
Well, very little of it is the answer. I mean, in particular, we had a big incident recently there. It's now gone public because my emails were first leaked to the press and then were foiled by the local media. We had a student resource officer in our high school who was posting rather extremist posts. and including blaming Antifa for the riots on the 6th and calling people who wear masks sheep and all kinds of very, stuff that I think is really inappropriate for somebody who's supposed to serve as a role model for kids in the school. And when I sent that information to our police chief and I said I thought he was not the appropriate person to be in that role, the chief removed him, not because of my singular opinion, but because it's what he thought was the right thing to do.
Right.
He doesn't report to me, but I gave him my opinion. So anyway, there was a huge mob that came after me online over this. And the accusation was that I had tried to silence him because of his political views, that I, as a Democrat, was trying to take out, it was cancel culture, that I was trying to cancel somebody on the right. It has nothing to do with his political party or his views. It's that I think it's inappropriate for somebody who's supposed to be working in our high school as a role model for kids who are very diverse and represent a lot of different views, to be using their social media, which is followed by the kids, to propagate stuff in support of the riots in the Capitol and calling kids that have to wear masks to school every day sheep because they're wearing them seemed inappropriate to me. But the point is, the details are not important because in a way, this is happening. This happens to women no matter where they are, no matter what they do, no matter what level of politics they serve in. I'm just a local town council person. It's a part-time job, not my full-time job, but it's really given me a lot of insight into just how social media fuels a lot of the toxicity in politics, how tough it can be for women, why women still are reticent to run, and why they become such targets. It's very easy to target them.
Well, I am super sorry to hear that you're having to live that drama in your own community, but
I can handle it, Pete.
I was about to say, but in a weird kind of way, I'm glad it's you because there are other people who wouldn't necessarily maybe have the network, the resources, or even the mental acuity and training to know how to deal with such things, and certainly the courage to not give in to assholes. How do we get there? What were we driving at in terms of
We were talking about politics and the state of our politics today and where things are. And then I know, since it's Women's History Month, we're going to talk about sort of where women are. So, I think that's where we are. Look, the United States is still so far behind the rest of the world in terms of the political participation of women. The World Economic Forum ranks us somewhere in the 80s relative to other countries. That's declined in the 4 years since Trump was in the White House. I hope we'll start to climb back. But it's not a great time for women in this country. The pandemic, women were struggling before the pandemic. Already you started to see a drop off in the labor force participation of women. That was starting before the pandemic. You already had disproportionate numbers of women in minimum wage jobs, disproportionate numbers of Americans in poverty, women. So women were already carrying this huge burden. And then the pandemic has just, wiped out decades of gains, not just because of the professions that have been so hard hit that were female dominated, that are female dominated, retail, hospitality, restaurants, et cetera, but also because of, working women, even in the professional world, who've been forced to quit their jobs because we don't have school and we have no childcare. And really what's happened, I think, this year is that we've come to realize that the failure to invest in the infrastructure to support working women, which other countries did over the last 30 years, and we have completely not done, never tried, never done, completely failed working women for most of my lifetime, has come home to roost. Because in other countries where there's infrastructure that supports women going to work, affordable childcare, paid leave, all of the things that you need in order for women to stay in the workforce, we never did any of that. And so the only child care safety net that we have, which is public school, as soon as that closes, it's a catastrophe. And we have some serious, serious problems in terms of the numbers of women who've had to drop out of the workforce and the effect that now has on on our entire economy. When women do well, families do well, the economy does well. But the reverse is true. When women struggle, families struggle, children struggle, our society struggles. It's just bad. It's bad for everyone.
You're so well articulated. And I never really, I guess I've heard it described that way, but I can't recall the public school system being like a safety net. And that's because it allows you to go to work while your child is under the care of supervised adults. And without that, what can you do? And women don't have that right now. Men don't have that. People don't have that. But it hits women disproportionately harder. And then if we do want to break it down, marginalized groups, ethnicities, black women, brown women, tribal women, even harder. Totally. In fact, so it's so hard to hear that when you say that we're not doing well right now. Well, let me ask you the difference in terms of the agenda. What is it between the difference between kind of Democratic and Republican or liberal and conservative women? I mean, I think your organization tries to be nonpartisan, but at this point, how do we differentiate between ideologies?
Well, I mean, listen, I think on women's issues on both sides of the aisle, women have historically been in broad agreement. There's been broad agreement about the need for affordable childcare and the need for paid leave and some of the other critical structures that women need in order to work. That hasn't actually been super partisan, except that Democrats and Republicans can never agree on how to do it. Right. And that is and frankly, look, I think the bigger issue is that there just has never been serious public outcry over these things. There's never been the kind of public momentum to get this stuff done that you see on other issues. So, in Europe, when, sort of the social safety net was built for working women, it's because women demanded it. French women, for instance, took to the streets. I mean, you saw this in Iceland, all around the world, where there's a political will to focus on the issues that matter most to women. It's because there was this momentum there. We just haven't had that in the United States. And I think the Biden administration, in my view, is the first administration in my lifetime that's even putting equity at the center of their agenda. It's been a sidebar. For Obama had both houses of Congress for the first few years of his administration. He didn't pass family leave, and he didn't pass immigration reform, and he didn't raise the minimum wage. There was like a bunch of stuff that Obama failed to do when he had control of Congress. Bill Clinton somewhat failed on family leave. They had the chance to make it a paid plan, 30 years ago. They didn't. He couldn't get it past the Republicans. He compromised, and we now have only about 20% of Americans that have any kind of paid leave. So, and I emphasize the Democrats, but, the Republicans had a chance to do this too, and they certainly failed. So it's a lifetime of failure to actually kind of give a crap about women's lives, and just a total underestimation of what it actually takes to make the promise of women's workforce participation real. And it's not a mystery, because there's a lot of other countries around the world that have figured this out. We just don't happen to be one of them.
Where do you think the policy agenda is right now, and what do you think of this? I almost said new crop, but it sounds so dehumanizing. New crop of women who've come into the House, but this new generation of female legislators, not only in the House of Representatives, but at the state level. It does seem to me like a seed was planted. Stay with me on the metaphor. At Trump's election, and that seed has grown, and there's a lot of roots at the state and local level with activists, with organizations, community organizing, and of course policy making that we will see in 5-10 years, and hopefully our generation of children, my daughters, will continue to feed that plant. But it feels like it's very young, and the roots are very weak still right now. How am I doing on that metaphor in terms of where we're going to be?
It's not bad. Listen, the first time we called it the Year of the Woman was 1992. So it's been a while.
Right.
Been at this for some time.
Yeah.
The progress has been extremely slow. I do think you're right that there is, what I'm excited about is that I think that there's a willingness among younger women, particularly like the Gen X and even like now some Gen Z women that are like not interested in waiting their turn, that are willing to run against incumbents. They're often running against Democrats in some cases, like the AOC model or Ayanna Pressley. But, they belong there, and they're not willing to just wait for the infrastructure to like tap them on the head and say, OK, it's your turn now. And I think that's a really good thing. It's a harder road to hoe, but I think it's right. And I'd like to see more of the congressional leadership step aside earlier, not hang on to their seats until they're like 110 years old, actually care about the future of the party.
Yeah.
The Democrats are terrible for this because we reward seniority in terms of like the power in Congress goes to people who've sat in their seats. Pelosi's shifted that a little bit in this last Congress, the last two Congresses, by putting some freshmen, some of these younger, diverse freshmen onto committees where they normally wouldn't be because they're new.
Yeah.
But it discourages people from leaving. And that, I think, is a problem. And we've got to really focus on this next generation. There is an amazing crop of people out there. I also think, frankly, there's some really interesting women on the right that are not loony QAnoners. I think Nancy Mace of South Carolina is a really impressive new member. I don't agree with her on everything, but she's amazing. She was the first woman to graduate from the Citadel. I mean, she is one badass lady. And she has been a very vocal critic of the Looney Tunes in her party. And we need that. Like, we need some of the folks on the right to be rational and to have the courage to stand up to the absolute insanity in their party right now. So, you know, it's a two-party system. We need good women on both sides of the aisle, women who believe in democracy, who believe in our Constitution, who plan to follow the rule of law. All of those things matter.
Are you inspired, or what word would you use to describe where you're at? I know you have some really exciting things going on coming up that I want to, you know, within this answer, you can tell me, how are you emotionally feeling in terms of the arc of history and the movement, which you've seen? You've been disappointed. You've seen triumphs. You've seen setbacks. You've seen advances. How are you feeling about where we're at and what's the work that you're doing right now?
Well, I always say I'm a pathological optimist.
I like that.
I will be optimist no matter what. But look, I think it's a very tempered picture. And I think we have to be honest about it if we're going to deal with it. That there is incredible progress to celebrate, all of the women who've broken barriers and, you know, done extraordinary things that we never thought were possible, all the women that continue to be firsts and groundbreakers. And yet, like, we're still dealing with garbage like sexual harassment in the workplace. Yeah. Powerful men abusing their position.
I almost forgot to ask you, and I know we're almost out of time. Andrew Cuomo, what is your thoughts on our governor?
It's horrific. It's horrific. His apology is a non-apology. He should resign. I mean, any man in power who doesn't realize that it's wildly inappropriate to be talking to a 23-year-old staffer about their sex life doesn't belong in their job. And to me, it's very black and white. I'm a Democrat. He should go. And we need to be consistent about this. I've written an op-ed, which I think should be out in the next few days, about why it's so critical that Democrats hold the moral high ground here. If we are going to be a party that stands for equity, inclusion, women's rights, LGBT rights, we cannot afford to have any double standards on these issues. And our leaders need to be held to a higher standard. He should be held to a higher standard. He has zero legitimacy going forward. He cannot hold his job and be the legitimate leader of this state when he abused his power, not just with women, but also with an Asian American member of this state assembly who he called and abused. It's outrageous. No CEO could keep their job if they behaved this way. He's got to go.
Do you think he should go? That was so
Let me think about it.
And succinct. No, you're not holding back. And
there's no room for gray.
Yeah.
There's no room for gray.
What do you say to somebody who's going to say, well, there should be an investigation? And
fine. Well, he basically admitted it yesterday.
Yeah.
I mean, he apologized. He's more or less admitted it. The investigation is going to find that they're right, because in this case, she reported it to her superior. So there's a paper trail. And there's multiple text messages that she sent to her family telling them about what happened. It happened. So I believe in a fair and just process. These things should not always be tried in the media. On the other hand, at this point, he's so consumed by scandal, I don't know how he does his job. So, look, I think we have to hold people to a high standard. Democratic leaders need to be held to the same standard. Yes, it's a double standard. No, Trump never resigned. Yes, he should have. Yes, that sucks. There's plenty of Republicans that have done really terrible things that should have resigned. And also, if we want to hold the moral high ground, we have to hold the moral high ground.
I know you got to go. So good talking to you. Thank you very much. Anything? I'm sorry. Do you want to plug? You got a heart out here.
I got to plug. No, so definitely go to aitogether.org, all in together, and sign up. We have 2 amazing forums coming up. One on women in healthcare with the leading women vaccine scientists from Moderna and Pfizer and J&J and Kathleen Sebelius and all kinds of interesting people talking about healthcare equity. And then in April, we have an amazing Black women's leadership program with Donna Brazile and Misty Copeland and Tish James and Alicia Garza and all kinds of badass Black women who are going to talk about power and purpose. And I hope you'll tune in.
Check it out. All the links in the show notes, all in together. You got a great booker. That's a lot of really awesome women in the same room at a bunch of events. Yeah,
it's me.
I had a feeling.
Okay.
Lauren, thank you very much.
You're the best. Thank you.
All right. Talk to you soon. All right. There she goes. Lauren Leader at Lauren Leader AIT. And check out All In Together. Awesome organization. Really awesome woman. And so happy to have her on here. And what other amazing women should I be having on here on Women's History Month? Let me know. I want to do my best. I think I'd let the ball drop on Black History Month and didn't do a good enough job programming it. Scheduling is one of the harder parts about the podcast or about producing any show, and this is a daily show, so it's sometimes hard to get a good mix. But I always want your suggestions. Send them my way, standupwithpete@gmail.com. Okay, now moving on, I want to share with you a conversation I had with an author who is an anti-poverty expert. He is a really smart guy. He's actually written several books, and his new book he co-wrote. It's called Poorly Understood: What America Gets Wrong About Poverty. He is a professor at the Washington University in St. Louis, where he is a professor of social welfare. And we had an awesome conversation. I really enjoyed it. I learned so much from researching him and his work, and of course, talking to him. Here's my conversation, busting myths about poverty. We had a lot of fun. Dr. Mark Rank, for the first time on Stand Up. Dr. Mark Rank joins me now, and I'm very excited to talk about this issue with someone who has studied and worked on and inside the issue for his whole career and written several books now. Congratulations on the new book that you collaborated with two other authors on. I'm really excited to have you on Stand Up. Thank you.
Oh, thanks a lot, Pete. It's great to be on.
So the book is Poorly Understood: What America Gets Wrong About Poverty. And I love the title because forever, as I've been learning and talking about this issue, I've been trying to debunk the myths about all of it. And your book goes a long way to answer several of these questions and of these myths. Who are the poor? Why is there poverty? What is the cause of poverty? Does welfare work? And much, much more. How extensive is inequality? So let me just start with one myth, which I think is one of the most effective. And it's this. Lyndon Johnson started a war on poverty. And 50 years later, there are more poor people living in more poverty than there were before that. It's a very effective and convincing argument that I've heard over and over. Why is it wrong?
Okay, so you're right. Lyndon Johnson declared a war on poverty, and later on, Ronald Reagan was famous for saying, we fought a war on poverty and poverty won. Well, it turns out that that is completely wrong, that the rate of poverty in 1959 was around 22%. By 1973, it was 11%. So poverty had been cut in half during a 10, 12-year period. And the reason is twofold. One was the economy was doing well, but the other reason was the war on poverty. We had programs that were designed to reduce poverty, and they actually were quite effective. So it's completely wrong to say we fought a war on poverty and poverty won. Now, did we eliminate poverty? No, but we cut it in half. And so that's a myth that you can't do anything about poverty. It's just there. That's just totally wrong.
So much shorter answer is it worked. It's been very effective. And without it, we would have much deeper, worse problems. Is that fair?
That's right. Yeah. If we didn't have these programs that we have, even though they're fairly weak compared to other countries, our rate of poverty would be much, much higher.
So the other big one that so many people believe, and I'm not sure where this started, most people point to the Reagan administration, is that government is the problem, not the solution. I kind of feel like that's somewhat uniquely American, but correct me if I'm wrong there about government.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think that is very American, that there's the idea that, you do it on your own. You don't depend on the government for help. And one of the results of this is that we have the highest rates of poverty in the industrialized world. So other countries, European countries, Canada, Australia, they're much more proactive in terms of addressing poverty through government programs, and they're more successful in reducing poverty. So if you compare the United States with these other countries, you can see these differences really playing out. But I think you're right. Within the United States, and we can talk about this, throughout, but, there's been a strong streak of individualism. That is, again, you do it on your own, you give, your own hard work and effort, and that you don't turn to the government for any kind of help.
In your world, in academia and in government, there are all kinds of different ways to measure poverty and define poverty and talk about opportunity and how to create opportunity. And I think that gets lost when we start arguing about it in the media. And I want to get into some of those real statistics now we define things. But one of the other most effective arguments I hear is, how we talk about what it means to be poor in America. And you hear this a lot on like kind of right-wing radio. I've heard it for years. They have pretty good lives. Yeah, they're on the poor end, but they have pretty good lives. They have TV and they have cable and they have air conditioning and refrigerators and they have phones and computers. It's not that bad. It's not like poverty in India. What do you say to that?
Yeah, that's certainly this sort of idea comes out a lot of times from the American Enterprise Institute, and they have a report that comes out every few years that just makes that particular argument. I would say, look, poverty is not as extreme in the United States as it is in sub-Saharan Africa, but I don't think that's the right comparison. The right comparison is how well are we doing compared to other high economy countries? And it turns out that the extent of poverty and the depth of poverty in the United States is actually much more extreme than these other countries. And in fact, there are areas in the United States that approach third world conditions in terms of poverty. So if you look at, for example, Appalachia, you look at the Mississippi Delta and Deep South, you look at American Indian reservations, the Central Corridor of California, you have conditions there that are approaching third world countries. So it's simply wrong to say that, folks who are in poverty here are doing okay. They're not. They're really suffering. And there's a huge amount of economic destitution in this country.
One more broad line and a big question. You mentioned race and ethnicity there. I think most people, when we think about poverty, at least I know I do, I instantly think about certain types of people, ethnicities. I think about black and brown folks a lot about being poor. But the truth is, most poor people are white, and my truth is that my mom comes from a very poor family. My grandmother died just a few years ago, always lived in deep poverty in rural upstate New York. So the truth is, it's mostly white folks who are poor, but culturally, it is different in terms of how poverty plays out and people's networks, and I think generational wealth and obviously discrimination and opportunity and so on. But we do need to, I think, talk about it to some extent, how it breaks down. You mentioned tribal folks and Indian reservations in the United States of America, Hispanic, Asian, black, brown, and white the most. How do we have a conversation about this? How do you write about it and think about it?
Yeah, you raise a really good point, which is there's not just one kind of poverty. There's many kinds of poverty. And the poverty of Appalachia is different than the poverty, say, in inner city St. Louis here where I live. So I think we need to keep all of those things in mind, that conditions differ widely. But I guess the thing that we really do need to understand is, because we have all of these different groups that face poverty, poverty really should be understood as an issue of us rather than an issue of them. And too often in this country, we view poverty as an issue of them, that it happens to somebody else. They don't look like me, whatever. They live in the inner city. The reach of poverty is really, really wide. And one of the things that we talk about in the very beginning of the book, which is, I think, surprising for a lot of people, is that if you look across the span of adulthood for Americans, 60% of Americans will experience at least 1 year below the official poverty line, and 3/4 of Americans will experience either poverty or near poverty. And that's like a huge percentage of the population. And you might say, well, why is that? Why does that happen? Think about this. Over the course of 20, 30, 40 years, things happen to people that they didn't anticipate. Somebody loses a job, they get sick, a family splits up. These are the kind of things that can throw people into poverty, and we don't have a lot of social protections in place to prevent people from falling into poverty. So I think this broader issue is the one of thinking about poverty, again, as an issue of us rather than an issue of them.
I don't know if you're familiar with it. I just had Heather McGee on. Her new book is The Sum of Us, and it talks a lot about that point you just made. So great. Getting back to your book, let's define the poor. Who are the poor? How do we define these things? As soon as we start to talk about statistics, by the way, Mark, as you know, we lose everybody because people can't understand these statistics. It's math. It's different for families and individuals. What's the easiest way to explain how we define poverty? And by the way, why we do have a technical definition for it?
Yeah. So, and this is an important question of how we do define poverty. Obviously, poverty can be defined in a lot of different ways, but the way that we kind of officially measure poverty is to say, if you fall below a certain income level, depending on the size of your household, we're going to count you as in poverty. If you're above that level, we're not going to count you in poverty. So last year for a family of 4, the poverty line was around $26,000. So if that family had an annual income below $26,000, they would be counted as in poverty. Now, this measure is, in my view, extremely conservative. If you try to sort of figure out what that comes down to on a daily or a weekly basis, it's very, very tight. But here's a really, I think, an important point here, that of all the people that are in poverty in the United States, 45% of them fall below half the poverty line. So in other words, instead of the poverty line being $26,000, almost half of folks fall below a poverty line of $13,000 for a family of 4. So there are a lot of people in this country that are living in what we might call extreme poverty.
Really, really well explained and great points in terms of the differentiation with what extreme poverty in America. That is so hard to wrap your head around that situation, to be in that financial situation. Just real quick, just as an aside, I always like to say that the hardest job in the world is being poor, because all you're thinking about is making it through today or this week. And it makes it really hard to have ambitious ideas about the rest of your life when you're just trying to survive. Do you have an anecdote to share about how people actually struggle that way?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's a great point. And a couple of things come to mind. One is there's been some work recently in psychology that's looked at this notion of it's called psychological bandwidth. And what it says is, we have a certain amount of brain power to focus on things. Well, when you're worried about where the next meal is coming from, whether you're going to make the bills for this month, that takes a lot of that bandwidth up. And so it really is a cost of living in poverty. The other ironic thing is this idea of the cost of poverty. Folks who are living in poverty often pay more for things like groceries or other items because there isn't like a big grocery store where they're living. They don't maybe have transportation to get someplace. So it's also very expensive to, in some ways, to be caught in poverty.
We talk so much about job opportunities and education. We talk about economics a lot. And I feel like the conversation is too much siloed in opportunity and jobs and economics and not enough in healthcare. Because when we're talking about poverty, if you're just barely making it by and all of a sudden there's an accident or an illness for you or someone in your family, you're set back, you're done, maybe forever, but definitely for a while. And that is uniquely American. How do we need to talk about, and how do you talk about healthcare and the changes that have been made over the last 10 years? I just talked to Jonathan Cohn also this week about his new book about healthcare, The 10-Year War, and it's so important. How do you speak about it and think about it in terms of poverty?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. I mean, healthcare is intricately connected with the issue of poverty. And as you point out, we have made a positive step with the Affordable Care Act in making healthcare more available to folks. But we are the only, that I know, the only industrialized country that does not provide national health care, that does not say, you know what, health care is a human right. It shouldn't depend on the size of your wallet. And we need to move towards that direction because, as you said, living in poverty and health care are intertwined. Let me throw in something here that's related to this. So I did a study a couple years ago with a graduate student here, and we wanted to try to estimate what the annual cost of childhood poverty was in the United States. What we did is we took the latest research and we looked at the fact that childhood poverty raises healthcare costs, just what you're talking about. It also decreases children's economic productivity when they become adults. And it also increases criminal justice costs. So we factored those in. And what we came up with was that in 2015, the annual cost of childhood poverty was just over $1 trillion. To put that in perspective, that's about 28% of the federal budget in 2015. And so it's not as if we're not paying for this. We're paying for it on the back end of the problem rather than the front end of the problem, which is always more expensive. The other thing that we came up with that I think was really important is that we estimated for every dollar we spend reducing childhood poverty, we would save between $7 and $12 down the road in these costs. So you're exactly right that, healthcare and poverty are intertwined, and we really need to get a handle on, again, providing some kind of universal health care for everyone.
Yeah, even if you didn't care at all about other people or other children, if you only cared about yourself and your own family and your taxes, if you wanted what was best for yourself, you would invest in other people's children. And so when you say that we pay a lot more on the back end, and if only we invested on the front end, I would like an example of what you mean by that. And I've also just want to include in my question here, I've also always thought and learned that the best investment we can make in childhood is education, and specifically pre-K. And there's all these interesting statistics that I've heard and studies about investing in universal pre-K. So I think that might be an example. But what's an example of an investment that would save us money if we would just make it initially?
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. That, invest the early years of childhood, from ages, when you're born till 4 or 5 are really, really critical. So things like investing in the nutrition of children, making sure that children get an adequate diet. That's a very simple thing, but it's a very important thing in terms of saving money down the road. And I can point to lots and lots of studies that, again, show that for every dollar we spend on those kind of programs, we save $3, $4, $5 down the road.
But couldn't you, I'm sorry, studies are great, but couldn't you in this case point to other countries as well?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. You could point to other countries that are doing much, much better. And I guess the point here is that, which is an interesting one that you raised about, even if you don't, have some kind of moral feelings about this, just from an economic point of view, it really doesn't make much sense not to invest in our children and our human capital. By doing that, we become more productive. But what we've done is we've written off a large segment of the population. And as you said, other countries are much better at investing in their children, and they wind up having actually a stronger economy as a result. So we can think about this issue certainly from a moral perspective, but we can also think about it just from an economic self-interest perspective.
Yeah, I often think about how we invest in healthcare versus nutrition. And if we had some kind of major campaign, educational and real actual investment into nutritious food, and even if you broke down nutritious food, Dr. Rank, you could think about the nutrition of potatoes versus tomatoes. One is vastly better for you than the other, yet the government invests so much in potatoes because of fucking McDonald's French fries, et cetera, and so on. I mean, that's my understanding. But if we ate better, we would have such lower costs on healthcare, and I think about how we could really incentivize that change with money, with capital.
Yeah,
with farmers.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you're saying. Certainly, you know, there's some big business interests that get in the way of this. But again, you know, if we think about our country as a whole, what will make us stronger and a better and a more morally just country is to make these kinds of investments in folks.
Mark, try this one on. Listen, I got no problem with paying high taxes and make good money. I got no problem with paying high taxes. My problem is the way that the government spends the money and gives that money to people, to incentivizing them not to work. I'm over here working hard. I'm happy to help anybody that's, you know, doesn't have the opportunity that I has, you know, hit some hard times. But really, most of these programs are wasteful and they just keep people on the government dole. And that's why I don't like high taxes, sir.
Yeah, no.
I don't know if you saw me. I pointed. You weren't looking. I pointed very hard down at you, and I made the point.
Well, it turns out that, you know, that all of that is just not the case. So
how dare you?
Yeah, right. So, you know, let's take the one about, there's a lot of fraud in terms of welfare programs that, you know, people are abusing this and they're, you know, several different identities. Ronald Reagan was famous for this. It turns out that the amount of fraud in terms of these programs is very, very low, much less than in some other places. And as we were talking about at the beginning, these programs actually are fairly effective in terms of protecting some people. We certainly have a much weaker social safety net than many other countries. But the programs that we do have, like the SNAP program, food stamp program, you know, these programs do provide very important assistance. And the other thing is that this has become so much more important right now in the midst of this pandemic and the economic sort of calamity that we're experiencing here. So, you know, and I don't want to talk about all the, you know, there's a lot of research behind this, but basically, you know, it shows that for the vast majority of people, they want to be working at a job that pays a decent wage. They don't want to be receiving stuff from the government, but because of the structure of the economy, there often, you know, things happen to folks and they have to turn to some of these programs. Let me give you an analogy that I think is really helpful in sort of reframing this issue. And that is the analogy of musical chairs. So picture a game of musical chairs where we have 10 players and 8 chairs available, and they go around, music stops, 2 people lose out. Okay, so we can say, well, why did those 2 people lose out? Well, they weren't as agile, they weren't as quick, they were in a bad position when the music stopped. But if we step back and we say, wait a minute, the structure of the game is such that 2 people are going to lose out. So it doesn't really matter what their characteristics are. That only matters in terms of who loses out at the game, not why the game produces losers in the first place. And what we need to see is poverty as a result of the structure of the game. And by that, I mean there aren't enough jobs that pay a decent wage. There aren't enough benefits that we've been talking about. There are a variety of things on a structural level that result in a number of people falling into poverty.
So, but I think that it's really important also to discuss, obviously, a lot of these solutions and why these myths persist. And I want to get to that, but I want to take a couple of fake callers at this point. I've had this similar conversation live on national radio, and these are the type of calls I would get. So fake caller number 1, let's say Walt in Ohio, you're on with Dr. Mark Rank. Walt, go ahead. Hi, Mark. Thank you for joining the show today. Now, listen, I personally know women who try to have kids just to get government subsidies and government handouts. That's why they get pregnant in the first place. You can't tell me that's not why. They're incentivized to have more kids to get more government money. I'll take my answer on the air. I'm not going anywhere. I'm Walt.
Okay, Walt, you're exactly wrong. And here's why. I've actually looked at and studied this question. So I did a piece of work a number of years ago that looked at the child birth rates of women on welfare compared to women in the general population. Turns out that birth rates were lower for women on welfare than in the general population. And I asked women on welfare, hey, what about getting an extra amount of money on a monthly basis for having another child? And here's what they said. That doesn't make any economic sense. Why would I have another child for an extra $50 a month? That makes no sense. And if you think about it, it doesn't make any sense. If you look at other countries, a number of these countries have actually been pretty proactive in trying to encourage people to have more children. And they haven't had much of an effect because that's not why people have children. They don't have children to get a welfare check. They have children for other reasons. Well, so while I'm sorry, but you're off base here.
Well, even if I agreed with that, sir, they should be more responsible and not have children that they can't afford, sir.
Okay. Well, if you think that's the case, then we should have things like, which we don't have in this country, good access to contraception, to education about sexual behavior and activity. We don't provide any of those kinds of things. So I agree with you that people shouldn't have children that aren't responsible, but we also need to think about this larger picture here.
Mary in Ohio, you're now on the air. Mary, well, I have no problem with the food stamp program, but what I do have a problem with people using their government handout to buy steak and lobster. I saw a guy the other day buy steak and lobster, and I didn't actually see him use this food stamps, but he looked poor to me. Anyway, I just don't like that. If you're going to get a handout, you should buy fruits and vegetables.
Well, again, Mary, is it?
It's Mary. It's Mary. I know I don't sound like a Mary, but that's my name.
I've talked to hundreds of people that are using food stamps, and I rarely encounter anyone buying lobster or steak on that. I think it's very much the exception. But, when we have a stereotype, we often ignore the evidence out there and focus on one or two cases. So, Mary, that may be what you're doing here.
You're very thoughtful with the callers and I appreciate that because sometimes they can be rude. Sometimes they don't care.
Well, we want them to continue listening.
Yeah, of course. Well, we want them to understand why these myths about poverty persist. And in the final section of your book, you address that. And my answer without reading that part yet is radio and television shows. And though more than anything else, my own personal experience, especially one of the most pernicious ones. I grew up poor and I am now successful. Rags to riches. You also take that on. But why do these myths persist?
Well, yeah, I think what you're pointing out is very, very true, that folks don't look at the larger picture, the research, the evidence. They really focus on anecdotal cases. And so, this case that Mary brought up about somebody using food stamps in this way sticks in the mind, and it doesn't matter if there are 99 other cases that aren't like that. But I think, as you said, we take this on at the end of the book. And one of the reasons, there's, I think, several reasons why the myths continue. But one of them is that by continuing to believe in these myths, it really justifies the status quo, particularly for those at the top of society. Because if you say, well, people are poor, it's their own fault, then I don't have any responsibility for that. And in fact, everything's okay. Whereas if we say, you know what, something structurally is wrong here, then we do have a responsibility to address this. The other thing I would say in terms of another reason for why the myths exist is that beyond just the general population, certain groups in society have really benefited from these myths. And one that I take on are politicians. So politicians have consistently used poverty myths and welfare myths to score political points. Ronald Reagan was notorious for that. But so was Bill Clinton, who ran on, if you'll recall, he ran on the idea of we're going to end welfare as we know it. Well, that was a very appealing message to sort of the blue collar Democrats, and Bill Clinton. Yeah,
he did it, and the results have been devastating.
Yeah, that's right. No, he did. And the results have been devastating. You know, people say, oh, this was a big success. We cut the welfare rolls in half. Well, yeah, but poverty went up. So it's like, what's the measure of success here? So I think, you know, and we still see this, you know, in today's society. Donald Trump certainly played on this card as well. And it's been used over and over again to score political points. So it's not, you know, because this is the issue. You know, we go through the book, we talk about all these myths and how they don't hold up to scrutiny and to evidence. And so we're left with, well, why do they continue? And these are some of the reasons why.
By the way, I got to ask you about the minimum wage, Mark, but I did just get an email from the caller. From the caller, Mary. Okay. Mary, you have to address this because she just sent me a photograph of what she calls a poor person with a basket of lobsters to disprove what you said, and I'll forward it to you. You can
that'll be good. I'll be sure to pay attention to that.
It says poor person right there, the caption. So minimum wage, the discussion about poverty can be not solved, but really addressed in one way. Raise the minimum wage. I mean, a newspaper used to cost a dime or a quarter. Now it costs a couple of bucks. And people didn't get the same raise as the newspaper company did. And so we can talk about inflation and all of that. But more importantly, this $15 proposal is so relevant, obviously, to speak about right now that it could possibly happen, I think, is surprising to a lot of us that have been following this fight for a long time. But some of the studies and research say that it would actually kill a lot of jobs. It would bring a lot of people out of poverty, but would kill a lot of jobs. And when talking about the minimum wage, I feel like when talking about economics, you got to talk about the current economic atmosphere. And I am receptive to business owners like this woman who I know that owns a Smoothie King franchise, a smoothie shop. And she's like, if I have to pay my employees $15, I will no longer be in business. So I'm really confused about the timing of this and how effective it is. But I'm also pretty convinced, according to most policy experts, that nothing would make more of a difference than raising the national minimum wage.
Yeah, I think the key, in terms of addressing poverty, I think the first place to start is creating jobs that pay a livable wage. And that I think begins with the $15 an hour. Now, it is true. There's been a lot of research that looks at in the last, 20 years or so, the effect of raising the minimum wage versus job loss. And all of that work really shows that the effect is pretty minimal. However, what we're talking about here is doubling the federal minimum wage. So it's sort of on a different level. And the Congressional Budget Office estimated that this would be effective in reducing poverty, but I think they said something like we would lose 1.2 million jobs as a result. Your friend that has the smoothie shop might not be hiring as many people. So, I don't want to be glib about it. It's not a simple sort of solution, but I do think that it is a very good place to start. And also we have to ask, that the average, the median wage for a full-time male worker in 1973 was actually once you take into account inflation, was actually higher than it was for last year. So in other words, over a 50-year period, the median wages for male workers has completely stagnated. They're not any further ahead today than they were behind. And yet for those at the top, their wages have gone crazy. So another sort of figure that you'll often see is that the average CEO in 1980 earned about 40 times what the average worker earned. Today, it's over 300 times. So the gains in the economy have really gone to the top. And I think that, we need to definitely keep that in mind when we say, hey, isn't it only right that a minimum wage worker should earn $15 an hour? Isn't it only right that if you work full time in this country, you shouldn't be in poverty? I think those are pretty strong arguments to make. One thing that I never thought about and hadn't learned anything about was this concept, and maybe it's a newish idea because of where we're at with the economy, but you in your book, you guys talk about the importance of education, why there is poverty in that section. Raising education and skill levels will not solve the poverty issue alone. And it's really interesting because you always think about retraining for coal miners. You think about re-education, all community colleges. But if there are fewer jobs because of automation, then we can educate the hell out of people and there's nowhere to go. That what you're saying? Exactly. And it goes back to the musical chairs analogy. If all we're focusing on is the characteristics of those who lose out, but we're not changing the structure of the game, then we're just going to have a better educated group of folks that lose out. So what we need to do, and believe me, I'm in higher education, so I obviously believe that education is important, but I think it's important for a lot of reasons. But what we need to do is say, yes, skills, education, those are important, but we have to make sure there's a job at the end of the line. And so that gets to these questions that we're talking about and how to create more jobs. And I think we actually, Pete, you may agree or disagree with me, but I think we're in a period right now where we might be able to see some changes happening. With the new administration, there's a talk about, maybe perhaps a New Deal kind of idea here. So I'm hopeful that we're starting to think about this along a more structural line than this sort of individual blame idea. Unfortunately, to this idea of the Senate filibuster and campaign finance and those two things being so hard to work around because you know all the solutions to end poverty. You've written an entire damn book about it with others. You've known these issues, you've known these answers forever, but you're not a lobbyist, and there is no lobbyist for poor people, and there are lobbyists for industries that have monopolized things. And so that even when if you're a well-meaning politician and wants to do the right thing, you've still got to raise money to get elected, to get your message out to do that thing. And I do think that's changing for the first time in a lot of ways. But I think we still, those are the problems. No, you're exactly right. I mean, clearly money in lobbying is really important. However, I would fall back and say, but so are people who organize. We've seen some pretty dramatic changes in groups organizing, the Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, there's been some real change here as a result of that. And what I'd like to see is some real organizing efforts around issues of economic vulnerability and poverty and low income. Because you're right. I mean, these folks don't have the money, that's for sure. But what about the numbers of people? And I think by doing that, you can bring pressure onto the system. And again, I would use the recent example of the Black Lives Matter movement that has shown to really kind of create a new discussion around issues of race and inequality. And the movement that began what year was the 99% movement, the Occupy Wall Street movement, talking about income inequality and wealth inequality and understanding that a lot more because it's so obvious now is, I think, really changed. I mean, you've been at this for a long time with all due respect. I would have, but I mean, that the conversation in the last 10 years about income inequality has really come to the forefront. That's exactly right. I mean, I unfortunately been at this for a while, and there hadn't really been that much discussion about inequality until the 1% and the 99%, the Occupy movement. And that really, and now, especially in the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, I mean, people are talking about this all the time. So that's a real positive change in my mind. And it came around as a result of people organizing and putting pressure on the democratic system. Well, listen, I'll let you go, Mark, because I am sure you have lots that other
important people to talk to and other things you'd like to do. But I love talking about this issue. I think it's so important. I'm so excited to have discovered your work and this book. And I hope that when I'm done reading the book that we can continue discussing it, because I actually think it is a sexy conversation to talk about the point meaning, to get people to listen, to care about. Poverty is tough to talk about because it's not, people think it's so depressing. But I like to think what we just did is the opposite of that. I think it was interesting, important, and you do great work. Thank you very much.
Oh, thanks, Pete. And thanks for raising the level of awareness around this issue. I mean, what you're doing is also really, really important. So thanks a lot.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mark. Well, there you go. Dr. Mark Rank. Definitely check out that book and all of his work. Poorly Understood What America Gets Wrong About Poverty. Loved talking to him. Great discussion. Really enjoyed it. And I love getting to talk to these anthropologists and sociologists and psychologists and economists. That's what I do a lot of here on Stand Up, and I have regular conversations with listeners like you as well. I've learned so much about the people, the community that supports and listens to this show, and I look forward to learning more about you. So reach out and tell me about yourself. standupwithpete@gmail.com. Are you or someone you know an expert that would be a good guest on the show? Love to hear from you. Well, that is all I've got for you today. Looking forward to talking to you tomorrow right here on Stand Up Daily. Tell your friends, give a review and 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. Subscribe if you haven't already at patreon.com/Pete Dominick, or just go to the paid subscription link in the show notes where you can learn more about everyday's show. And when you are a subscriber, you get a daily email and a daily nature picture submitted by another listener every day. It comes in your email box, and I need those nature pictures. So if you're still listening to my voice babbling away, prattling on, then send me your hashtag vitamin N, the vitamin nature picture to standupwithpete@gmail.com. And now, listener, singer-songwriter, the great John Carroll wrote this song for us. Take it away, Johnny.
Wheels been leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. You got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. And even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. This is the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw the land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the seat of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up. Oh, got to stand up. Ooh.
Hello, show enders. Yesterday, I asked you here at the end of the show what March means to you, and I got several responses from folks who know to listen to the end or accidentally did, including from longtime listener Brent Hughes, who said, Pete, after realizing that you've been doing a post-end music piece, I've gone back to listen to a bunch of them. It's like finding hidden treasure. I love it. In response to your recent one, the month of March, for me, has always been anticipation made real. I love this. I love what Brent is saying. He says, if I think about looking forward to positive life events like a vacation or a party, many times the anticipation is more exciting and enjoyable than the actual event. March, with the impending spring, looming thunderstorms, budding plants, returning birds, etc., is electric with anticipation. Even more so this year with the possibility of a better summer COVID-wise and the hope of course corrections following the past 4 years. Maybe it's corny, Pete, or too vague, but I've always loved that anticipatory character of March. Oh, yeah, and also my second son was born on March 31st, which is great. He's a cool kid. We like him. My wife was just thrilled he was not born on April Fool's Day. Peace, Brent Hughes. Brent, I love that, and I think everybody that stayed to the end will love it too. What a great community of people. Thank you. Goodbye.